It's OPB Politics Now for Friday, November 14th. I'm politics editor Andrew Theen. Earlier this week, Think Out Loud and the Politics Now team joined forces for an election roundtable. And we tried something new. The episode was aired live, on camera, on opb.org and our YouTube page. It was fun. So fun, we're sharing the audio for you here as well. Here's this week's show.
We start right now with all four members of OPB's political reporting team: Alex Zielinski, Bryce Dole, Dirk Vanderhart, and Lauren Dake. If you've got questions for these Oregon political experts about what just happened in Oregon, you can give us a call. The number is 1-888-665-5865. Again, that's 1-888-665-5865. It's great to have all four of you here.
Hey.
Hi. Dirk, let's start with you. None of the three statewide office wins for Democrats, Secretary of State, Treasurer, and Attorney General, were surprises. But which one do you think was most notable?
I mean, really the only one of these that we actually had questions about going into the election was Attorney General. Treasurer and Secretary of State race, the Republicans hadn't raised a lot of money, hadn't campaigned very much. So this Attorney General race featuring Will Lathrop, a Republican and former prosecutor, and Dan Rayfield, a state representative, former House Speaker, was really the one people were looking at because there was a big law and order focus. This is at a time when Oregon voters aren't very happy with the law and order vibe of much of the state. And so the question was whether or not really focusing on this was going to give Lathrop a leg up, and whether Republicans might be able to be competitive in a statewide office, which they aren't often very, very competitive.
Lathrop didn't have the baggage of being a lawmaker. Right. This is post-Measure 110. So a lot of reasons why he might have done well, but he still lost by 9 percentage points. How do you explain that?
I mean, I think it just shows very, very forcefully that Republicans still have headwinds in Oregon, even in this big red wave year where obviously things nationally went very much in the party's favor. You know, it wasn't just, though, that Will Lathrop is a credible candidate. He was also up against a credible candidate in Dan Rayfield, someone very tied in with the establishment, someone who knows the people that are going to fund his campaign, can spend that money well. So not an easy task to go up against Dan Rayfield. Also, I just think voters this election weren't as sort of backlashy on law and order issues as maybe they were back in May. We saw a lot of progressive candidates in the Portland area succeed, and so I just didn't see a lot of backlash in the state results.
So the party affiliations in these three offices didn't change, but are you expecting any either, say, meaningful policy shifts or even just changes in emphasis from Secretary of State, Treasurer, or Attorney General?
People might say this is unfair. Nothing I have seen from the people that prevailed suggests to me that anything is going to be profoundly different. We will see Dan Rayfield be trying to act as a bulwark, a Democratic bulwark, I'm sure, against the Trump administration in the way that Ellen Rosenblum once was. Tobias Reed wants to bring trust back to the Secretary of State's office after former Secretary Shemia Fagan resigned. We have not been told to expect anything radically new, though, from any of these folks.
Bryce, let's turn to Oregon's 5th congressional district. This is one that attracted national attention in the lead up to election, and I should say national money as well. Why?
This was one of the most competitive swing districts in the country. And, you know, the last election in 2022, it was decided by a really narrow margin with Republican Representative Lori Chavez-DeRemer flipping the district for Republicans. But this was considered, a true toss-up all the way until the end. And both parties saw it that way. They flooded this race with millions of dollars. Outside groups spent a huge amount of money. I'm sure most Oregonians saw on their TVs like the, huge amount of attention that was coming into this race through just endless amounts of attack ads and also in their mailboxes. But yeah, it was one of the most expensive races in the country. But the National Democratic Party especially, they clearly saw this as an opportunity here, and they focused a lot of their efforts toward Democratic State Representative Janelle Bynum. This district, it has more Democrats than Republicans, but the majority were not affiliated with either major political parties. So much like the presidential race, this ultimately came down to swing voters, people who were undecided and can go with either party.
What stood out to you in the tactics of Janelle Bynum and Chavez-DeRemer in terms of their attempts to pick off these either moderate affiliated voters or unaffiliated voters?
Right. So I think both candidates knew that they would need to appeal to those middle-of-the-road voters and really try and portray their opponent as being an extremist, being a political extremist. But again, like the presidential race, they had their own messages. Bynum really focused a lot on her work in the legislature, that, talking about how she passed bipartisan bills around police reform, which happened in the aftermath of the police murder of George Floyd. So clearly a really politically tense moment. She tried to portray Chavez Dreamer as being a threat to not only democracy but abortion rights, and trying to tie the incumbent to President-elect Donald Trump, who she endorsed. Chavez Dreamer, meanwhile, also focused on kitchen table issues. She focused on crime and public safety, the economy, and she tried to appear moderate on abortion rights while trying to blame Bynum as being, one of the top Democrats who, was partly to blame for, the struggles that the state had with Measure 110 and fentanyl over the last couple of years.
I should have mentioned this, but Janelle Bynum, she did win. She announced her victory on Friday, flipping this seat. What do you think made the difference for her?
I think that people are going to be parsing the results of this election for a while. And I think it's certainly possible that Oregon voters were energized by the potential to make history in this race and elect the state's first Black member of Congress. But also, Janelle Bynum did not make that a central message in her campaign. So what I think is really important to remember is that this is still a relatively new district. 2022 was actually the first election for this district after the redistricting process. And the two major population centers in this district, Clackamas and Deschutes counties, they're changing a lot. They're growing a lot. Clackamas County is still politically purple, but it is becoming increasingly Democrat. Deschutes County has had some really notable political shifts, and the city of Bend is becoming increasingly liberal as it's growing too. So I think those two areas made a huge difference in this race.
Let's stick with you. What happened with Measure 117? This would have instituted a system of ranked choice voting to determine all statewide and federal races in Oregon starting in just 4 years.
About 58% of Oregon voters rejected this measure. It received really dismal results in most of rural Oregon. But even some of the state's largest counties like Washington, Clackamas, Lane, Deschutes County, they all rejected it. The proponents of this measure, they said over and over again that ranked choice voting, can be the antidote to political polarization, that it gives people more say. And they really thought that they had the support that they needed from a whole bunch of labor groups and advocacy groups. They raised a ton of money out of state groups spent a huge amount of money on this race, millions of dollars. But all of this clearly did not resonate with those red and purple counties. So the opponents of this measure claimed, especially Republicans, claimed that ranked choice voting would be costly. But I think one big issue for the campaign was the pushback that they faced from county clerks. These are, the nonpartisan elections officials that Oregonians turn to, to trust their election process. And yet more than nearly half of the state's county clerks, raised a whole bunch of opposition to this measure around how much it would cost, where the money would come from, and how the system would work.
What did you see in the votes in places where versions of ranked choice voting already exist? I'm thinking about Portland, where it's happening now, Multnomah County, where it's going to be instituted soon, and then Corvallis and Benton County.
This part fascinates me because Multnomah County, which is, like you said, it's going to use ranked choice voting in 2026, and Benton County, which has been using it, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, for a few years now. Both of those counties supported the measure. Hood River County also did, but they don't, as far as I know, have any form of ranked choice voting. But the two counties that have it have approved it previously, approved it this time. And there were even some city officials in Corvallis, like the mayor, who endorsed Measure 117. So it'll be really interesting to see how things go if with these two counties in the next couple of years, and if that ultimately, and if the state kind of looks at that and says, things went well there, or things didn't go well there, and we'll see if it ends up back on the ballot.
Alex, speaking of things going well or not, let's turn to what we now know about what happened in Portland, where we had ranked choice voting for the first time ever. There had been a lot of talk about potential confusion among voters who were going to be dealing with ranked choice ballots and multi-member districts, very long ballots for city council races, actually pretty long ones for mayor as well. What do we know now about what happened?
Well, In terms of turnout, it was much lower than anticipated. I think the county as a whole had anticipated about 85% voter turnout, and it's closer to 72%, at least today. To be fair, voter turnout was low across the state in different cities that weren't experimenting with a new type of voting like ranked choice. One big piece of data that stands out to me, the Oregonian did some number crunching and found that just about 20% of people who voted in Portland didn't vote in the city council ranked choice races. So they just stuck to the county races, state, federal. It's higher than the percentage of voters who cast ballots but sat out in voting in council races in previous presidential elections. So that stands out. I think what makes it extra interesting is that turnout was especially low in District 1, which is Portland's newest district in the east side. About 30% of people who cast a ballot didn't vote in the council race, and that's pretty striking.
Is the assumption here that it was the complexity of the ballot that depressed particular voting for particular races?
That's my assumption, but it's also what people who are smarter than me and who study this stuff are saying. From speaking with political science researchers, there's a few theories. One is that, yes, this is a new ballot with, a ton of names, a complex or just a new way of voting for folks. And that might have left voters overwhelmed and a little confused. And maybe they just want to kind of, make sure they get their presidential vote in and move on. And it also, takes time for voters to get used to big changes like this. Also, to focus on the East Side data that I pointed out, it's worth noting that Portland's eastern neighborhoods have been largely ignored and underrepresented in City Hall for, decades. Only 2 city commissioners in the past have lived there. Usually, since we've had citywide elections, folks are, kind of clustered closer in the city. And if you don't live in a neighborhood, maybe you don't really think about what's going on in that neighborhood. This is the first time now we're going to have 3 people elected specifically for those neighborhoods. So, suffice to say that voters in those districts feeling ignored for so long, they might not feel like their vote counts still. Sure, we've changed the way that we represent folks in city council, but it's not happening immediately. It's not like a light switching and suddenly everyone on the east side is saying, oh, great, we're represented, we're going to vote now. I think it will take time to prove that, like, hey, this is actually, you have people who are representing you in city council. Maybe it's worth you actually cast your vote. And so folks that I've spoken to kind of who study this stuff say that it might take some time to start seeing actual, stronger numbers out there.
I should just remind folks, our number, if you have questions for our reporting team, it's 1-888-665-5865. Alex, just sticking with this for a second, are there ways to tweak this system, or is the complexity, which I appreciate your point, which is separate from a sense of being ignored for a long time, which could take a while for that to not feel that way. But is the complexity baked into the system, or are there tweaks that could actually keep the basics of what we're talking about in the city council case here, ranked choice voting in combination with multi-member districts? Is it just forever going to be long and complicated?
I don't know if I can if I can say yes or no to that specifically. I can say it's in the city charter, the complex pieces of it, the parts of getting rid of primary elections, which means we have so many candidates running in a general election, the piece where we have multi-member folks on the same ballot. That's part of the city charter, which can be changed with another vote, with, if the city council decides to change something. Really what can be done to tweak around the edges is focusing on just more voter education, I'd say.
If you just tune in, we're talking right now with 4 members of OPB's political reporting team, Lauren Dake, Dirk Vanderhart, Bryce Dole, and Alex Zielinski. Dirk, to go back to you, I want to try to measure 118. Just first briefly remind us what it would have done.
Yeah, it would have put a 3% tax on business sales above $25 million in the state. It would have been the largest business tax hike the state has ever seen, about $6 billion a year, and almost all of that money would have flowed back to Oregon residents in the form of yearly payments. We were told roughly $1,600 per person, not kids, elderly, everyone, not just voters.
It went down in flames, arguably very well-funded flames. Yeah. Can you give us a sense for what campaign spending was like on the yes side and on the no side?
Yeah, I checked today. The yes side spent around $636,000. The no side spent almost $16 million. So yes, very, very lopsided spending there. And you certainly saw that in the TV ads, the mailers, the messaging. It was omnipresent warnings against this thing.
And as we've talked about in the past, it was a combination of groups that we often see opposing business tax increases, business-funded groups, but also there was a huge backlash by members of the Democratic establishment, the Democratic Party establishment. Do you think that we can read anything in these results about the future appetite in Oregon's voting population for big redistributive policies, or is this too specific to this one measure?
It feels too specific. This thing didn't really have a champion. Like you're saying, every weighty political group in the state was coming out against this thing. So we didn't have the sort of battle for the soul of Oregonians or whatever you want to call it that we've seen on past business tax measures that also failed. Now, a question I have is whether or not a redistributive measure like this can get that kind of support in the future. Will people always find reason enough to say no to this kind of bold experiment in Oregon? Or were we really just not in a mood to experiment much this year, as we also saw with the ranked choice measure? And so that also doubly doomed this thing. I don't know.
Lauren, there were two other statewide ballot measures that voters split on, even though you and others have argued that they're connected. So first of all, what are these two measures, 115 and 116?
Yeah, they're both pretty straightforward, really. Measure 115 creates this process to impeach and then remove statewide elected officials. Oregon is the only or one of the only states that does not have a process to impeach officials. So the way that would work is the House would vote to start an impeachment process. The Senate would hold a trial to consider convicting a person and then removing them from office. They would need a 2/3 vote in order to actually do that. So that's impeachment. The idea behind Measure 116 was to create an independent commission so that somebody else could set salaries for state elected officials. So for the governor, secretary of state, the judges, and that was 116.
How are these connected?
So they were connected, but to be clear, both of these ideas have been floating around and talked about for years. But they certainly became more urgent when former Secretary of State Shemia Fagan resigned. Our listeners know she was a Democratic rising star. Many believe she was next in line to be governor. She was serving Secretary of State when Willamette Week reported that she had this lucrative side hustle with a very problematic cannabis company. And so at the time, when that was revealed, she started to lose a lot of public support. And Republicans certainly lamented the fact that they did not have the ability to impeach her. So that was how it was tied to the impeachment measure. And then to the salary measure, she said, hey, I'm a single mom. I'm working as Secretary of State. I make $77,000 a year. It is not enough to live on, which is why I took this contract with this cannabis company. And so that is kind of what prompted the salary discussion.
So the impeachment measure did pass. So that's now going to be, there will be an official mechanism for the legislature to remove state elected officials from office. You mentioned the Shemia Fagan example. Before that, there was John Kitzhaber in 2015, who also, like Fagan, resigned. That was pre-impeachment. Do you have a sense? This is, it's guessing, but it's been an inescapable question for me, how those situations might have been different if there had been, and I should say, both of those officials, they resigned because they lost support from their own party. How might that have been different if impeachment had been on the table?
Yeah, this is an interesting thought exercise because, obviously who's to say for sure. But I think that with both Kitzhaber and Fagan, it moved very quickly. Like they lost public support so fast. And in politics, public support is everything. You start to lose that and then you lose your colleagues. I think that if there was an impeachment process, the House would have had to vote. Then the Senate would have had to go through this whole trial. The momentum would have slowed down. Maybe the end result would have been the same, but I think that it would have allowed for a more thoughtful and perhaps even nuanced process.
Meanwhile, voters said no to Measure 116. That would have been creating the compensation board, so it wouldn't be lawmakers who would be deciding the salaries for themselves and for statewide elected officials. So you could read the implicit message from voters as being, hey, if you think these salaries are too low, including your own salaries, then raise them yourself. Do you think they're going to do that?
Well, they have certainly tried and failed because the idea of lawmakers giving themselves a raise is also, as we were talking about, public optics, not a good look. They don't like to do that. I think the other reason, though, that's probably worth mentioning here that this measure failed is because there were a lot of concerns around how independent this commission would actually be. And so I think that also is part of the reason why it went down. Will lawmakers eventually raise their own salaries? I don't know. They have tried for a long time. And I think the compelling argument to do so is that if the salaries remain too low, the only people who can serve remain, semi-wealthy, independently wealthy, retired people, and then that keeps, making up the majority of our state legislature.
We've got a lot more from the members of our political reporting team. Stay tuned. From the Gert Boyle studio at OPB, this is Think Out Loud. I'm Dave Miller. If you are just tuning in, we're doing an election wrap-up right now with OPB's political reporting team, Lauren Dake, Dirk Vanderhart, Bryce Dole, and Alex Zielinski. We are coming to you on the radio, as always. We're also streaming live today on YouTube. You can watch us at opb.org/live stream. Again, it's opb.org/live stream. You can leave a question there. You can also give us a call. The number is 1-888-665-5865. Dirk, what happened with the Oregon legislature?
Not a lot that was all that dramatic. The Democrats still have majorities in both chambers. Actually, the makeup of the House is exactly the same, 35 Democrat, 25 Republican. What we did see was some movement in the Senate where Democrats claimed another seat, giving them a 3/5 supermajority in the Senate. That is somewhat crucial in the legislature because that gives the party the opportunity to pass taxes on their own without a single minority vote. So, but relatively unchanged.
We got a question for you, I think, you're the best person to tackle this, from Jonah Lydon, who says, could you tell me why there wasn't a quorum requirement measure on my ballot this season? After so much chatter post-walkouts, I'm surprised.
No one has wanted to take this thing up. We had Measure 113 a couple of years ago that said if you have 10 unexcused absences in the legislature, you don't get to run again. That got bolstered by the state Supreme Court, which really ruled on how it works. For whatever reason, people that don't want to see walkouts, which manipulate quorum rules, in the 2/3 quorum rule in both chambers, have not wanted to make the case to voters that they need to change the state constitution to actually manipulate those to a simple majority. I think maybe they think it's too wonky. People are going to tune out. And there may also be a vibe that Democrats who run the legislature might not be in the majority for all that long. And maybe they want to reserve that option for themselves if they go out of power.
The way no big party right now wants to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate, besides Jeff Merkley, who seems to be consistent even when his party could use it, like right now. So sticking with this issue, though, Dirk, the seat that Democrats flipped to gain their supermajority in the state Senate was in Bend, and it had been held by Republican Tim Knopp, who was barred from running for re-election because of that voter pass measure, because of his unexcused absences. Could you make the argument the Democrats gained that supermajority because of this voter pass law intended to prevent walkouts? Is that a direct result?
It's not as clean as that, because I think Knopp had as good a shot at winning that as any Republican. But this is also a district that changed in redistricting. 4 years ago, I think Republicans had a 5-point voter registration disadvantage. This year, they had about a 10-point voter registration disadvantage. That's tough for anyone to get over, obviously. So not clear Knopp was a slam dunk, but probably could have taken a good shot at it, I would say.
Bryce, I want to go back to you. We talked earlier about Janelle Bynum's win in Oregon's 5th congressional district. That was a Democratic flip, Republican to Democrat. But the Democratic hold in Washington's 3rd congressional district, which is Southwest Washington, seems just as significant. Remind us who was in this race.
Sure. This race was between Democratic Representative Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez and Republican Joe Kent. This race was actually a rematch. Kent lost in the last election as well. Gluesenkamp-Perez won this election with about 51% of the vote, which, like you said, like the 5th congressional district in Oregon, was a big win for Democrats as they're increasingly at risk of losing control of Congress.
How has Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez positioned herself over the last 2 years?
She's taken a pretty moderate stance as a Democrat and has been widely known to criticize her own party as being out of touch with working class people, like the people who live in her district. As part of this, she, for example, she didn't endorse Vice President Kamala Harris or other Democrats in Southwest Washington. She voted against student debt forgiveness, and she showed support for Israel during its war in Gaza. And it's really striking that she continues to win in a pretty Republican district, while Republicans elsewhere in the country, they're flipping districts and taking back control of Congress and the White House. She continues to make the argument that national partisan politics it's just not what her district is about. And she focused a lot of her campaign on those economic issues, which clearly a lot of voters cared about during this election.
We're going to be talking with her on this show tomorrow. But what do you think her success in her district, a district that went for Trump in 2020,
right,
what it suggests for possible Democratic strategies going forward?
I think the Democratic Party is going to be doing a lot of soul searching in the next couple of weeks. They already are about what they got wrong during this election. But Gluesenkamp-Perez's win clearly indicates that focusing on working class issues like inflation and the economy, that really resonates with those swing voters in moderate areas that are really, really critical for this party. And I'll be interested to see if the Democrats continue to have their candidates focus on national issues, or if we see kind of a swing back to more of the blue dog centrist Democrat style, like what we had with Kurt Schrader in the 5th Congressional District for a long time. I mean, if you were to judge solely around how Gluesenkamp-Perez is performing, I mean, they certainly should take a note of it.
Alex, I want to go back to Portland city politics. As we talked about on Friday, we now have clarity on who's going to be the new mayor, Keith Wilson, and most of the seats on the enlarged city council. I'm curious what stands out to you so far in the way Keith Wilson has been approaching this transition.
So he has a really clear agenda, right? He wants to end unsheltered homelessness by 2026, so within a year. And my understanding is that he's making sure that path is clear before he enters City Hall. He's meeting with the governor. He's meeting with County Chair Vega Peterson. He's meeting with the incoming council members to make sure that what he says is everyone's rowing in the same direction. I think he's really not interested in any kind of divisive politics. He's trying to kind of make sure everyone's on the same page, make sure they're in lockstep when he enters City Hall. And from what he's going to really need council's support and the support of other folks in political positions in the city and the state to, reach these goals.
When I asked him on Friday on this show how much support he has from members of the new council, to actually enact his big idea of 20 to 25 nighttime shelters in places like churches or community centers, he didn't give a direct answer. He did say, like you said, that he's talking with them, he's meeting with them. Do you have a sense for how much support there is on this new council? I think there's real clarity on 10 of the 12 positions right now and a pretty good sense for the other two. Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense for how a majority of those folks want to respond to homelessness? Yeah,
I mean, one way to measure how they feel about homelessness in general is just how they talked about it on the campaign trail, right? Not specific to his policy, but their general ideas about how to address the city's kind of largest issue. And the majority of folks who've been elected do not want to use arrests to penalize unsheltered homelessness, and they have boosted the need for more shelter, which is kind of, Wilson's pitch. The majority also wants to continue to work with the county to provide homeless services, which Wilson also wants to do. So there seems to be openness from council that they'll work with him on his proposal. I think the big question is just the details, right? And like kind of how these gaps in his pitch will be filled, if it'll be able to, if you'll have enough churches and community centers and folks on board. And I think council's looking for details. I think candidates are looking. I think the public are also looking for details. So
one member of the public who's looking for details is Sarah Yes PDX, who is on YouTube and asked this question for you about the way we're getting information about the tabulation. She said this: why are they tabulating Portland's ranked choice voting ballots while mail-in ballots are still being received? They need to wait until all are received to start scoring. This is actually an issue that we've talked about in the newsroom about how this works.
This up a lot.
Right. This is why I said let's ask Alex.
Right. So the argument, there's pros and cons for both, right? The idea of waiting until we get all of the ballots and then just doing one big tabulation of all the ranked choice, the rankings. That is one way that some places operate. We might have to wait a week to get the results there. The other option is what we did this election, which is whenever ballots come in, the elections office kind of starts from scratch and recounts all the ballots. The argument for not waiting is really an argument around transparency and trusting the elections office. I think, if I recall, in Alaska, which actually rejected its ranked choice voting system last week, they have a process where they wait a week to get all the results. And that led to a lot of distress within voters who kind of want answers at the same time that they get state and federal results. And so I think it comes down to transparency at a time where we have this brand new system where people have a lot of questions. They want to see how it's being done. And so the city and county elections office really leaned into showing as much data as possible, as often as possible. But at the same time, it's adding to some confusion.
I just want to make sure that Sarah there, but other people understand what you're saying, because there's a key point here, which went quickly, which is that every time they get even just one new vote, then they completely retabulate it. So let's say that some candidate was eliminated in round 4. It doesn't matter. When they get another vote and they release the new results tomorrow based on the new tabulations, that candidate is back in there from the beginning and they do it everything again. So what we're seeing sequentially is, all right, it's almost like a whole new election, a set of election results every day. But what you're saying is that they made the decision to show us sequentially each version instead of waiting until the very end to show everything all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to go around the table because we're almost out of time, but I'm just curious. There's so much that we've covered, but there's a lot more all 4 of you are going to be covering in the weeks and let's just say months to come. Who knows what's going to happen in years. I'm just curious what you're excited to report on. Lauren, first, what's on your docket?
I'm excited to get back to reporting on how these officials govern. Now they've been elected. Let's see how they govern. I'm eager to see what Governor Tina Kotek does under a Trump administration. And the state recently settled a huge child welfare civil lawsuit in which the judge and many other people said they really think that the governor needs to get involved in order to overhaul the broken child welfare system. So I'm eager to see what she does on that front.
Bryce, what about you?
I'm excited to cover how the state plans to reform its transportation system. This is a really big ticket item in the legislature this session. There's a huge budget crunch going on with the Department of Transportation right now, and some serious needs, especially in rural Oregon and in the transportation system there. This is just a big, giant thing, and I'm really curious to see how lawmakers navigate it.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, we're entering a whole new chapter of Portland government, and being able to watch the mechanisms of that kind of play out in real time. We've heard about what it could do, what it might do, and being able to see what this brand new city council of 12 people and brand new mayor bring to the table. Being able to watch that, I think, is what I'm looking forward to the most.
Dirk, you're last.
I'm going to put excited in quotes here, Dave. No, I'm really interested to see what the new personalities we will have in Salem, how they're able to come together. We have a former House Majority Leader in Christine Drazen back in the House. She could be the leader again by the time next week rolls around. She put a lot of delay tactics and other sort of forceful mechanisms into play. We saw a Senate that could not function 2 years ago with a lot of different players. Can they come together and get things done at a time? All evidence suggests we are really going to need to get some things done in Salem.
Dirk, Lauren, Bryce, and Alex, thanks very much.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
This week's live stream episode was taped in the Gert Boyle studio at OPB. It was produced by Sage Van Wing, and our audio engineer was Nalene Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. Subscribe to OPB Politics Now anywhere you get your podcasts to hear the latest episodes each week. And subscribe to our YouTube page to see all of our amazing journalism, from podcasts like this one to videos from Oregon Field Guide and beyond. We'll return next week with more political news and analysis from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, thanks for your support and thanks for listening.